We're live.
Hello. We are live. Welcome to June 29th.
It's a Tuesday, not a Monday.
Things are different and changing and topsy-turvy. We're just keeping y'all on your toes.
We thought, you know what? Let's try a different time.
Let's see what's going on.
See
We will certainly be more alert at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
On a Tuesday than at 11 o'clock on a Monday. So we hope whenever you are watching this, you are more awake and more able to join us in the thoughts and comments and questions.
Absolutely. Because it is the second to last day, the penultimate day, if you will. Of Pride Month, we're going to tackle a couple things that cisgendered heterosexual folks like ourselves should keep in mind about Pride Month, and that's the main topic today. But before we jump into that, as always, we've got some empathy exercises. So the first one, I should say this too, for anyone, whenever you are joining us, if you're joining us on the podcast or you're joining us in the replay crew on YouTube, we love the replay crew. And everybody, wherever you're joining us, all the links to these things that we're talking about will be in the show notes for you to explore further.
That's right.
So the first one is the very exciting news that a young man who plays professional American football has chosen to, in one of the least dramatic ways possible, which I love, come out as gay. Carl Nassib, who currently lives in Westchester, Pennsylvania, here in the Philadelphia area. What, Philly?
Represent.
And who currently plays for the Las Vegas Raiders, who I totally forgot we're not in Oakland anymore, made a Instagram video a little while ago and just was very casual and was like, hey, something I've been meaning to say for a little while, I'm gay. This is incredibly important for a whole host of reasons. He is the first current player on an active roster to come out as gay.
Mm-hmm.
This is, in a culture of the NFL that has a lot to say about masculinity. Anybody who is demonstrating potentially disparate masculinity is really exciting. And also, there's always calls for professional athletes to be a little bit more open about their sexuality if they're not heteronormative, because athletes are role models, as they frequently are. Dr. Aaron and I both read a lot of sports-based romance novels. People are constantly coming out in those, but they're not all the time, constantly.
So many gay men in hockey, man.
So many.
In romance. So many.
But not so much in the real life, so we know. And obviously, anytime somebody comes out, it continues to hopefully eradicate the stigma around coming out. And so that continues to help. So good on ya, Carl Nassib.
Yes. Number 2 on our empathy exercise list is also exciting Pride relevant news, where a competitive weightlifter, Lauren Hubbard from New Zealand, lifted a whopping 628 pounds in 2 lifts during the Olympic trials to qualify for her first Olympics, the Olympic Games coming up next month in Tokyo. And when she competes, she will make history as the first openly transgender athlete ever to do so. Congratulations, Laurel. I'm sorry, I think I said Lauren, but it's actually Laurel. I apologize. I'm not great at reading. But congratulations, Laurel, on qualifying for the Olympics in these weird times that we're still having Olympics. And similarly to everything Dr. Kristen said about Carl, Laurel represents trans folks in this symbolic capacity. Not all trans folks, but it's important on these levels to have representation and visibility so that what is normal, which is the breadth and width of the spectrum of gender and sexuality, becomes seen as more normal. So we wish Laurel all the best in Tokyo. We'll certainly be rooting for her. I don't watch weightlifting, but I hope she does well. Either way, she made it to the Olympics, which means she's damn good at her job. And that's our second empathy exercise for today. Our third empathy exercise is also one I am responsible for finding. So I'm just bringing up the article. It came across my Twitter feed from Aaron Haynes's The 19th News, and it is the exciting announcement that there are going to be women on quarters, y'all.
What?
Little known fact, one of my favorite words, and a word I use to describe myself, is a numismatist, and that is a person who collects money. Mm-hmm. I am a numismatist. The American Numismological Society is in my hometown of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Shout out. They're a great place. If you like the history of circulating money, it's a great place to go.
Who doesn't?
But you might not know this, but women aren't generally on money here in the United States. The only other woman, aside from like the symbol of America, besides Susan B. Anthony, was Sacagawea, was on a very special edition, like gold quarter. So 2022, women's faces will be on quarters for the first time, and the public gets to help choose. So make sure you look in the links below for how you can vote for people. But full credit to Representative Barbara Lee of California, who's been working on this legislation since 2017. But we are going to get some pretty exciting ladies. But between 2022 and 2025, we're starting with Maya Angelou and Sally Ride. We're also going to do Wilma Mankeller. So shout out to Indigenous folks. Adelina Otero Warren, who's a Latinx suffragist, and Anna May Wong, who was an Asian suffragist as well. So those are the first 5. You can continue to vote on the other ones. Again, representation is important because seeing these humans will hopefully get people interested in their lives and their stories and make them way more known than they already are.
Absolutely. Speaking about things that need to be more well known.
Oh, what a transition.
Well, thank you. I do this professionally. We are heading to our 4th empathy exercise, which is the terrible and yet not shocking news out of Saskatchewan that came last week. Aaron, was it last week? That another mass grave has been found at a site of what the government calls residential schools, but that's not real. They're not schools. The Cowessessis First Nation reports 751 unmarked graves at the site of the former Maryeville Indian Residential School. This is, for anyone who remembers, there was 215 unmarked graves found at another site for another First Nations people earlier this year. So we're around 1,000 unmarked graves.
1,300, because there were a couple unmarked graves found before the Kamloops one.
Okay.
So we're over 1,300 unmarked graves in Canada so far. And I mean, I follow a lot of Native folks on Twitter, and someone shared a map of all the red dots in the Canadian provinces that were official residential schools or boarding schools. It's a lot. It's a lot. So this is the tip of a very big, very, very sad iceberg. But hopefully this will mean some restoration for the folks associated with this school. I can't, like, the unenduring, never-ending trauma of these residential schools just has to be horrific. And my heart goes out to all Indigenous folks who have to be continuously re-traumatized by the finding of these graves.
We've talked a lot about unmarked graves here on our channel and in our work. It's something that has happened not just in Canada or the United States. It's happened in Ireland. It's happened in India. It's happened lots and lots and lots of places. And so if this is the first time, maybe this or the Kamloops incident is the kind of the first times you're encountering this, we've got some other resources for you. And we definitely encourage you to, as an empathy exercise, if you have never been part of a population that may have been shoved into an unmarked grave, to just be really frank, this would be a good time to investigate thinking about what would happen if you were.
Mm-hmm. All right, last up, what do we got? We're talking about apologies. Go.
Oh my gosh. Well, one of our Pantheon actors here at the Good Doctors Diagnose at Abbey Research, is Michael B. Jordan.
Oh, we love him.
We love him for a variety of reasons. We first fell in love with him in Friday Night Lights.
No, QB1.
QB1. And we have gone on to love him as many things, including Killmonger in Black Panther, which is one of our foundational texts here. Ryan Coogler's Black Panther. But he, very fascinatingly, Dr. Aaron brought this to my attention. So actually, Dr. Aaron, why don't you unpack this for the folks?
Yeah. We've talked a lot, especially in our Good Doctors Diagnose, about the idea of cultural appropriation and what it means and how it hurts people, causes trauma and pain and upset. And Michael B. Jordan, who is a very conscious, very aware young person in the world, started a rum company in which he used the name Joubert. Apologies if I mispronounced the French there. And was called out for cultural appropriation because Joubert is a cultural celebration in the Caribbean islands. And a lot of people who are from those islands or of that Caribbean descent and heritage felt like he was misappropriating and misusing and not understanding the point of the Joubert festival and celebration and cultural idea. And so they said, like, Michael, you can't do this. And you know what Michael said? Michael said, I hear you. I'll change the name. So we talked about apologies last week. He did an excellent job. We'll link to the Root article that has the text of his apology. But he just said, like, I'm listening. I hear you. Our intention was never to offend or hurt a culture we love and respect and hope to celebrate and shine a positive light on. But we did, and I'm sorry. We'll change the name. And like, if you want a better example of how to just straight up acknowledge that you didn't know something, you learned it, and you're changing your mind, Michael B. Jordan.
Absolutely perfect. Because that's so much of just the process of humaning is not knowing something, learning something, acting differently.
Unlearning something, learning it new, changing your minds, all things that we talk about so much because we need to normalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Given
Absolutely.
to us in a perfect case study. So thank you for being unintentionally culturally appropriative, Michael B. Jordan, so that we can use it as an opportunity to show us how we can all do that, even if we're well-intentioned, and learn and grow and change.
All right, then let's get into our main topic, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right. So today we wanted to wrap up Pride Month with, like I said at the top, a little bit of an understanding of the things we got to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have 5.
We have 5 of them. We like to make lists. We hear they're popular with people.
We love a list. So the first one we'd like to cover is that Pride is a resistance movement. Dr. Aaron, take it away.
Yeah. So it's really interesting.
Well, we are laughing because Omar, one of our dear friends, has joined us, who says that he was late because Drag Race distracted, which we understand. We completely understand. So welcome.
Totally fair, Omar. Drag Race captivates us all. So you're welcome. Late. You missed our empathy exercises, but you can check them out another time. So Pride as a resistance movement is our number one thing that cisgendered heterosexual folks should know about Pride, because it is a time for celebration. Pride means a lot of things to a lot of people, especially in LGBTQ plus communities around the world. But the corporatization of Pride, which is another point on our list and we'll get to in a few minutes, has a way of sanitizing, rewriting, changing what the original history of Pride marches and the Pride movement was. So you need to know that Pride started as a resistance movement as a part of a long history of queer folks fighting for acceptance, equality, recognition, no discrimination, you name it. And it started in 1969 with a police riot, a riot against police, an uprising, some people call it, outside the Stonewall Inn in New York City, and thus became the commemorative tradition of having marches to commemorate what took place on Stonewall in the years after. And that is where we get the idea. Was June 28th, I think, was Stonewall, wasn't it? Yeah. Which is why Pride is in the month of June. So all of this has an origin in a movement that was complicated, and all of the civil rights movements that were taking place during the 1960s. We had racialized civil rights movement. We had a disability and ability civil rights movement that came out of the 60s. We had the queer civil rights movement as well. So remember that Pride is a resistance movement. We still have a long way to go to fight for these things like equality and acceptance and equity. So keep that in mind when you're celebrating during Pride or year round. Number 2.
Sorry, can I just jump in here? One of the things I want to point out, because this is important for movements, is that while Stonewall was the first time that then they did a 1-year anniversary march, and it's kind of been perpetually in June since '69, there were lots and lots and lots of riots and resistances before Stonewall. So just so folks understand that, especially in California, there was a lot of trans action against police. There's a lot, and because this is the same for every movement everywhere. We talk about movements as though they're cohesive, which we're going to get to in a minute when it comes to Pride. But there's also offshoots, Pride is celebrated not in June sometimes. Pride was a riot before Stonewall. So just to bring that all back.
Yeah, and it's so important because as we're trying to educate so many people about Stonewall that don't know about it, a lot of places, a lot of articles, a lot of listicles say that Pride started in Stonewall, or that the movement started with Stonewall. And that could not be further from the truth.
Yeah. It didn't. It didn't. It didn't.
The modern incarnation of Pride.
Yeah, because
the marches come from that, but movement for LGBTQ plus rights and recognition and acceptance long before in lots of forms. So that's important to remember as well. And if you want to learn more about it, we cannot recommend enough the FX Hulu docuseries Pride, which does a great job of kind of troubling the myths that we have about Stonewall and Pride, and making sure that we know queer folks were resisting and rioting well before that fateful day at Stonewall. So yes, good introduction. Great. All right, number 2, you want to take this one, Dr. K? Sure.
It follows on really, really well, which is that absolutely no group is a monolith.
Nope.
So we've covered this as, speaking of that incredible Pride series, by the way, if you are one of our international friends who does not have access to that documentary series, we are covering it as well and having a conversation around it. So please join us elsewhere on the YouTube channel for a conversation around the history, 1950 to 2010 of American queer rights movements. So speaking of, I use the word queer a lot because it's the one that the most of my friends are comfortable with, and is kind of something that people I'm in relationship with have said this provides a really good umbrella. Lots of other folks prefer LGBTQIA+. I also just trip over those letters, and so queer just is easier for me, to be honest. But if I'm in a space where somebody says I don't like that word, then I choose another word, because no group is a monolith. So there is no one way to be gay. There's no one way to be lesbian. Also, those are binaries that may or may not, just as much as there are gender binaries, there are also sexuality binaries. Everybody is kind of messy, which means that every group is messy because every human is messy. So it goes on like this. So just hold the mess in tension. One of the guiding principles here at Abbey Research is that everybody is more complicated than you give them credit for. And so that is no different, especially I think as more and more of those letters get visibility: intersex, asexuality, demisexual, trans masculine, trans feminine, these words, these labels, these ways to classify oneself become more common parlance. I think we're going to find more and more people that are like, oh God, that word is how I feel.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be like, oh, queer folks just showed up. No. There's been gay folks since there's been humans, but people can get louder when they know what to call themselves. And so we're gonna get that more. And the more you have people in a movement, the more the waters are troubled.
Yeah, and it's just such an important point, especially if you're a cis het folk and you are trying to build empathy and understanding for what is not your lived experience. It can be way easier to categorize in order to understand. It's a human condition, but just remember, none of those letters is a monolith. There is not one experience for any category. And just get to know people as people and respect the language that they choose for themselves.
Perfect summation. Okay, number 3.
Yeah.
You go.
Number 3, buying Pride merchandise is problematic. Please do your research. This one's pretty self-explanatory. We talked a little bit about the corporatization of Pride. You've seen it everywhere. Everyone has Pride gear now. Because it's, for some corporations, it's in earnest. For some corporations, it is about making money and having the appearance of solidarity. So make sure you do your research and buy your Pride-wearing merchandise from places that do what they say they're going to do, that follow up their words and their merchandise with actions. This is very, very important, especially since there are corporations out there that have anti-trans policies or they don't have family leave for queer folks, all of those kinds of things. So support organizations, local ones if you can, but support organizations that are supporting Pride and what it means and the folks that it belongs to, not just on paper.
Absolutely. And all that research is pretty easy to find. So don't just, do a couple Googles and let it be your guide.
Google is our friend.
Google is always our friend.
Yeah. All right. Number 4, HIT.
So this is one of those ones that we could talk about for approximately, conservatively, 84 to 48 hours. So we're just going to really quick hit this.
Yeah.
In most of the world, gender and sexuality were not binaries before colonizers showed up.
Yup.
And when colonizers showed up and they brought predominantly Catholicism and Protestantism, or then later Islam, all of those faiths, it's very, at the time that they were colonizing entities within the states that used them, were very much preached as monolithic, as monolithic binaries of sexuality and gender. Mm-hmm. That is a really academically complicated way to say that both Islam and Christianity are much more complicated than that. But the colonizers pretended they weren't. Mm-hmm. And that when we are moving around in different cultures, we need to realize that not only is the binary between that everyone is a man or a woman and everybody is gay or straight, that humans aren't actually wired like that. The mm-hmm. cultures are wired like that, but human persons are not. So this is something that we are happy to talk about further. If this is confusing to anybody or you have some questions, please don't hesitate however, and whenever you are encountering this. We know that might be one of the things you've not heard before. We haven't heard a lot of people talking about it either. So we want to just be really clear that that's part of a bigger conversation about colonization that we're also having elsewhere on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to frame it that way, right? Because especially we're locating this conversation as to cis het people talking to other cis het people. And if you don't know these lived experiences, if you don't know these realities, then you might think, and I know I've heard a lot of people talk about this, that like, well, where did these people come from? And, they haven't been around that long. And, transgender is something new, when it's really not. It's just that it's newer towards being publicly discussed. We have media now, we have coverage in a lot more ways that people can voice who they are in a lot of ways, especially during colonization when that was suppressed. And when those people and those identities and those lived experiences were suppressed. So it's really important to remember that, like, you can pretty much go to any indigenous culture around the world and find that they were way more gender and sexuality fluid than we even had the words to understand at that time.
Yeah, and again, like, we can do the deep dives into state control and what that looks like, and I'm happy to talk about exactly why the Catholic Church needed to define marriage so specifically at later times as part of its colonization tactics. But let's move on.
Let's move on. Speaking of understanding different folks, our number 5 tip is one we talk about here, and we enact this one a lot in what we consume and what we discuss. Make sure that as you are building your empathy, educating yourself about things that are not your lived experience or identity, that you paint a broad stroke. You fish in open waters. I don't know. I'm messing with metaphors because it's in the afternoon. But make sure that you engage in a whole range of genders and sexualities that are different from yours. This will help you build empathy and understanding for when you encounter folks that identify that way. So go as specific as you can, go as broad as you can. Remember that you have to hold those two things in tension, because as we said, no culture, no group, no idea or identity is a monolith. So you can't say, oh, I have read a book about a trans woman, I now understand all trans women. No, but you understand that trans woman.
And they may, in that book, talk about patterns, and they may do. Janet Mock's book especially is really good at unpacking some of the trans history. So you may know things, but that just makes you Hermione Granger. It doesn't make you, like, it doesn't necessarily equate to empathy. We remind you again that empathy is a posture with which we move through life.
Yes. So in order to have a well-developed posture, please make sure and continue after Pride Month is over. You know what? Queer folks exist throughout the year. We can certainly talk to, listen to, learn from, celebrate, watch films, read books, listen to podcasts that deal with all aspects of queer life and lived experiences any time of the year. So we send you, we beseech you, as Dr. Kristen Often says, to go out into the world and continue to do this work when that calendar turns to July 1.
And we can't wait to take this journey with you. That wraps up our Pride coverage for the Good Doctors Diagnose. We've got one more video tomorrow that'll air as we are talking. It's Tuesday the 29th. On Wednesday the 30th, you'll get our review of the documentary about trans life in Puerto Rico called Mala Mala. That'll go up. And then that is truly the end of our Pride coverage for this year. And we want to let you know that next week on the Good Doctors Diagnose, again, Tuesday at 3 p.m., we are going to, kind of in acknowledgement of the Independence Day holiday in the United States. And we're going to talk a little bit about why flags matter so much, because it may not be something you've ever thought of. It is something that we have, for a couple different reasons, thought a lot about.
Spent a lot of time with flags.
Lots of fun with flags with Sheldon and Amy. And we would love to unpack for you a little bit of why flags are so important. And so we will see you then.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Take care, everybody.